on the Cutting Edge with Dr. Lee Pierson, Dr. Robert Stubblefield, and Steve Richins. Brought to you by the Ayn Rand Center UK. And we have a special guest. Our special guest today is Dr. Adam Reed, who has a PhD in psychology. So we'll be going at the topic that I'm going to botch and Lee will fix. I'm certain. Our topic today is about cognition and how imagination and emotion are essential, optional, or irrelevant, or antithetical to the cognitive standing or
process.
Okay.
Something like that.
Okay, so with everybody get your super chats ready if you're interested in imagination. This has been a fascinating study for me, so I'll turn it over to Lee.
All right, let me just say a couple of things before we turn to Adam. I was thinking about how to delimit this topic, and at one point I just had imagination. But I realized I wanted to have emotion. I wanted to have them together, even though they're very different phenomena, because they do share one important feature with respect to cognition. People often use either imagination or emotion or both as a substitute for evidence. And I think all of us here will agree that is a bad idea. You should not use imagination for as a substitute for evidence. That would be, in the immortal words of Leonard Peikoff, that would be confusing Walt Disney with metaphysics, which we do not want to do. So that's a starting point. But I think we need to look further and see if there's some other roles that imagination and emotion have in cognition other than as evidence. That's the big error. That probably is the cause of, well, it may well be the cause of most mysticism, or maybe all mysticism in the world, is thinking that just because you can imagine something or just because you feel it, then it must be the case. And that we definitely don't agree with. But then there's another side to it that we want to explore. And of course, we'll need to talk a little bit about what we're talking about, imagination and emotion. Maybe I'll let Adam give us a first cut on that. And that's probably all I need to say to start with. So, hi, Adam. How are you doing? Dr. Reed, would you like to say something to us about the subject?
Yes, I'm doing fine. And I'd like to say two things. Number one, emotion is indispensable in valuing, and cognition, being our tool of survival, is so inextricably united with cognition that we cannot really pull them apart in any meaningful way. Because the key element, the reason that we have cognition, is to translate our intentions into action. And our motivation for translating intentions into actions is, of course, an emotion. So their emotion is indispensable. As for planning, there is ample anthropological evidence from the study of primates that all hominids plan. And in order to plan, one must imagine what one has not done yet. And this is essential in everything we do, including what came to be my specialty, user-computer interaction, where the user plans what they intend to do using the computer, and the user's intention is absolutely crucial. And in order to intend, one must imagine what it is that one intends to accomplish. So I see them as all inextricably connected with each other.
Okay, that's quite an assertion. I have some things to say about it, but I think I'd like to turn it over to Bob first if he wants to talk a bit. I want to go get myself some drugs so I can handle this a little better. I'll be right back in a few seconds. In the meantime, Bob, have you got something you want to ask Adam or talk about with Adam? I'll be right back.
Well, I wanted to make a point that when I saw the title of what we were going to talk about, one of my first thoughts was, how in the world or why in the world would you want to talk about something that's not there? That is, it's a metaphysical fact that one of the functions of your mind is that you can imagine. And it's a metaphysical fact that your body has emotions. And so it's like, what's the importance of breathing to life? You know, as Adam put it, they're inextricably involved. So have you now drugged yourself up?
Yes, I just got my Coke Zero here. I shouldn't be advertising, I guess, but anyway, sure, I'm ready. Adam's wording was a little different from yours. You said inextricably involved. Maybe they're the same. Well, the word I want to take issue with or question anyway is the word inextricable. Do you mean, let me ask just what you mean, Adam, by that. Do you mean to say that you cannot distinguish thought from emotion? Your thoughts from your feelings, effectively speaking?
Okay, I think that whenever I measure the carrying out of an intention, which, you know, among psychologists in this field, I'm mainly known for inventing a method of measuring speed accuracy trade-offs, and it's the accuracy of how accurately you carry out what you have already imagined that I measure. So I use inextricable in the sense that they cannot be measured separately. I measure them together.
Well, I'm not sure. I don't know if I want to pursue too far in the exact nature of what this measurement is, but I'm talking about introspection. That as I'm talking about, can someone, which I think has to be true, that introspectively you are able to distinguish your thoughts from your feelings. If you can't do that, I think that casts serious doubt on the human ability to be rational. Because again, your conclusions, that what I agree with, where is that starting point here, is that conclusions must be based on evidence. That's a principle that goes back to W.K. Clifford, who was a 19th century mathematician. It's called Clifford's principle. And he presented it as a principle of morality. It is immoral to believe anything based on insufficient evidence. That's a slight paraphrase. And I think that's true. In order to do that, you have to be able to distinguish your thoughts and things that are based on evidence from your feelings, which, you know, are not necessarily based on evidence and do not constitute evidence. And I think if you can't say if we can't do that introspectively, we're in trouble. Now, whether you can measure it by some experimental means that we probably shouldn't go into, I would say is another question. It's a different question.
Okay, I agree with this, that we can make an effort to ignore our emotions, values, even our imagination in evaluating the validity of evidence and then drawing conclusions from it. However, that is also an intention, and being an intention involves emotion. In other words, I value objectivity, and that is the reason why I try to ignore my emotions in evaluating evidence. And it's a good idea to do that, but it inextricably involves emotions and values as well.
Okay, if what you're saying is thinking is motivated and emotion is at least a part of motivation. I think we can agree to that. And it sounds like you're okay with the idea that we're able to distinguish thought and emotion. Bob wants to jump in here, it looks like.
It just strikes me as very much akin to the fact that you can't have consciousness without something to be conscious of. And therefore, everything that has to do with consciousness is inextricably involved with existence. And yet, we have to distinguish. After all, there's the primacy of existence opposed to the primacy of consciousness. So it strikes me that the point you're making, Adam, is very much like that.
It's very much like that, but there is one thing that many people are not aware of, and that is that the nature of consciousness is a relation. It's a relation between the conscious organism and that of which the conscious organism is aware. And the process of consciousness is the process of evolving that relation over time. Now, it may have physiological correlates that we can measure with magnetoencephalography and so on. And I have been involved in that. We don't understand it very well as yet, but one should not confuse the physiological correlates with consciousness itself. Consciousness as such is the relation, not its physiological correlates.
I think we're all on board with that here anyway. I mean, at this in this forum we are, yes. Okay, I want to
Adam,
go on.
can I, Lee,
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry,
Lee, can I,
Yeah.
I should have said this earlier. In a previous post, because I'm interested in what imagination is, and I know that's not the full discussion here, but you said in an HBL post, and I hope you remember, if not, it's fair that we can just pass on this. You said imagination is a mode of thinking, but not a medium of knowledge. Can you explain that at some point, if that's not in the...
Is that a question for Adam?
That's for Adam.
Yes.
Okay. I think it's very clear that one can make plans. And for example, primates, and we have observed this in chimpanzees, so it's not something exclusive to humans. Primates plan very complex plans of actions. For example, how to hunt an elephant. But there's always the possibility that in reality, the elephant will do something we didn't plan for. So we should not confuse the imagination that we use to make plans with what is actually happening during the execution of our plans. And this is just as true of the computers we interact with today as the elephants that our ancestors used to hunt.
Sounds good to me,
Thanks.
Steve.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to push on a little further here. I don't want to criticize any particular authors or get into that polemics about it, but there are some people who seem to think that imagination is essentially arbitrary, and so you have to basically shut it down when you're doing cognition. Maybe I'm paraphrasing badly, I don't know, but I think there's a position like that. And what I'd like to say in opposition to that is that imagination is volitional. You choose to do it. You choose to imagine stuff. I think we ought to have another name for when I may be fantasy, but that's probably not the right name. When things just daydreaming maybe or something, when things just occur to you in some visual or auditory imagistic form, so that would be something else. But basically, imagination is volitional, and for that reason, it can be done well or poorly. You can do it well. You can imagine. That is to say, you can rearrange things that you've observed, which is a paraphrase of Ayn Rand's way of describing imagination. Rearranging things that you've observed, that you've seen, or perceived anyway. That can be done well or it can be done badly. It can be done in conformance to what you know, or not in conformance. So there's no necessity that it has to be arbitrary or whimsical, as one writer put it, for a product of whim. It doesn't have to be, it can be, but it doesn't have to be. There are standards. So for example, my favorite Imagineer is a scientist. Of course, imagination occurs in both science and in arts, and the arts as well. But today we're focused more on cognition. And so I think, and plus I know more about science than I do about art. So I'm going to talk about science here. And Galileo was perhaps the greatest of all thought experimenters. He did a number of very good thought experiments. And what he did was he tried to do them. When he did a thought experiment, he was careful. He tried to do it in conformance to what he knew, to the knowledge, or at least to his beliefs. And I think of thought experiments as a way of drawing out conclusions from what you believe, that are implicit in what you believe, and making them explicit. So it's really, I guess, I think we could say thought experiments are kind of a form of deductive inference. And again, the value of the thought experiment depends on the premises, that is the materials from which it's built up. So Daniel, maybe you could flash that Galileo picture on the screen. Okay, well, I guess you can see that. So this is one of Galileo's most famous thought experiments. Those are supposed to be hills. There, two hills next to each other, identical hills next to each other. And there's a kind of a little sloping valley between them that it's not a complete V shape. There's a little slope there. So you could drop a ball down one and it will rise up on the other. And,
okay, if you want to see this full size,
okay,
you
want to
need
see it full size? Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very simple. You need
Daniel's
to
controlling
just
this,
set up your video for 2 screens and then pin the image using
you're
the
talking
3
about
dots.
the user. Yeah.
Yes.
You're talking about a user. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Pin the image to the second screen. And by the way, the second screen doesn't need to be a real screen. It can be just a window. So if you only have one screen, you can still have a large window in which to look at the thought experiment chart in detail.
Well, I think Daniel can make it fill the full screen. Maybe Daniel, can you make from your end? I think he can do it from his end. I think without
but
everybody.
I've already done it from my end.
Okay, you've done it. Yeah, you can do it, and I guess I can too. I'm not going to bother because I know what's on the screen already.
I can have it for people for like a minute if we want to talk about it. Like you won't be seen, all of you. Just
that's the idea.
Itself.
We don't need to be seen for every instant. That's good. Yes, that's fine. Okay, so there's our 2 hills, or at least there's the right half of one hill and the left half to the other, and there's a valley between them. And notice that it's not exactly a V. It's a nice smooth curve. So you can drop a ball down. And by the way, Galileo did a lot of experiments, real experiments, with inclined planes and balls. So he knows a lot. I assume, I'm assuming something here, that he did this thought experiment after he did some of his research with inclined planes, but I'm not absolutely sure of that, but I think he did. In any case, that would provide a useful context of knowledge for framing this thought experiment. Now, this is a thought experiment because what he's doing is he's ignoring friction. He's subtracting out friction from the situation to study what would happen without friction. This is, of course, important to get the principle, the physical principle. And what he does is he sets up the two hills. Then he imagines the hill on the right, imagines the angle, the slope angle decreasing from it's about 45 to start with. And he keeps decreasing it, and he keeps decreasing it, and he keeps decreasing it. And he observes mentally from his thought experiment that the ball on the right ends up going further and further. The more you decrease the angle, the further it goes. And there is a kind of limiting case that he has at the bottom there, which it looks like from the thought experiment, in the limit, the ball would keep rolling off forever. And that's a way of coming at or arriving at the principle of inertia, which is his radical break, unfortunately, you might say, from the Aristotelian physics, as he discovered this principle of inertia, which is fundamental in mechanics. So that's a good example of a well-done thought experiment, well thought out, and one done in conformance to knowledge that he had. Now, if his knowledge was wrong, you get a wrong result. But that's the way inference, deductive inference for that matter, works. That if your premises are wrong, you get a bad conclusion. But if you do it right, and it's possible to do it right, you get good conclusions. So that's good. We can get rid of Galileo now, Daniel.
Well, I don't think we should, because
put Galileo back up, please, Daniel, if you would.
I think that all planning, in primates at least, consists of forming a mental thought experiment and if you need to hunt an elephant with a group of other primates, you need to explain to them what you imagined. But that tradition persists in universities, and Galileo is thought to be the first modern scientist who actually never physically did an experiment all by himself. They were all thought experiments until actually built by his graduate students.
Oh, somebody else did the work for him. I was afraid you were going to say that he didn't do the experiments, because I know he did. Or I've been told by reading history that he did the experiments. But okay, the actual work was done by grad students. Well, that's a tradition in universities that has been followed ever since. So I don't doubt that for a moment. But yeah, so I agree with you, Adam. The planning of getting an elephant, killing an elephant, and as you said, the elephant might do something to upset your plans. So there's that to consider. I'll go further. That's one kind of thought experiment. There are thought experiments all over the place. All kinds of them, many kinds of imagination are thought experiments. Here's a good one. There's a book called Atlas Shrugged that some of you may know about. That book is a gigantic thought experiment. It's a thought experiment on the question of let's see, what is the question? What would happen if the men of the mind were to go on strike in society? What would the consequences of that be? And she develops those, and it's entirely a work of imagination. Yet it's definitely true that we can learn from it, because she developed that thought experiment from a large number of realistic, reality-based premises. So my point in this, and I think Adam will probably agree, is that thought experiments can be done well. You get the elephant sometimes, probably a lot of times. They can be done. They also can be done poorly. So there are standards. So when philosophers do thought experiments, when scientists do them, they're usually pretty good. When philosophers do them, they're often not so good. So there's the There's the infamous, for example, the infamous zombie thought experiment in philosophy of mind, where you're supposed to imagine something like a human being, something that is identical to a human being in all respects, except that it is not conscious. And it behaves like a human being, does the same things, it mouths the same words as a human being, and it runs around, and that's the philosopher's zombie. But the problem with that is, of course, you really can't, it's not really possible to imagine it that way in detail, because in fact, if you had a human, something that was exactly like a human, except that it was not conscious, but that's impossible because it would be conscious. Whatever it is about the structure of the body and brain that gives rise to the emergent property of consciousness would still exist. Well, see, I'm giving a certain theory about the thing that says that they're wrong. The zombie thought experiment does show the implications of a certain false theory of mind. So that's the problem, is that thought experiments can be right or can be wrong, but you have to try to make them conform to fact. Many of them don't.
Yes. Now, let me comment on something here, which is that the tradition of advising people to try to avoid emotions when trying to think objectively.
All right, well, hold on a
comes
second,
from-
Adam. Can we hold on a second? I wanted to take up emotion. I wanted to take up emotion next. So how about
Yes, but it's relevant right at this point.
That's true, because that's why they're the two topics are intertwined. Okay, go ahead. We're going to talk about emotion more a little bit later, but go ahead, Adam. Go ahead, sure.
Okay, there are many social psychology experiments which show that the typical American college freshman is very prone to wishful thinking. And to avoid wishful thinking, the advice of people who take that data more seriously than it should be is to avoid emotion in order to avoid wishful thinking. And in fact, the most common reaction from intellectual leftists to Atlas Shrugged is that it is an example of wishful thinking.
Well, upon this point about the social psychology findings, that's a whole other subject that we can take up another time. But just briefly, the big flaw in all of social psychology and a lot of cognitive psychology in this regard is that they deny or ignore. In other words, we have a stolen concept coming up here. They deny or ignore volition. So they think that humans are by nature wishful thinkers. They are by nature irrational. They are by nature biased. There are all kinds of experiments that allegedly prove that people are biased, because on average, college sophomores, exhibit these biases and errors and things, but they don't even take into consideration the possibility that you can overcome bias, that you can fix errors, that you can think rationally if you choose to. It doesn't even enter their minds to bring that up in these studies. But that's actually another subject we could take up at another time. I don't know if we should go much further down that pathway. So anyway,
but of course, their conclusion from those experiments that one should try to avoid emotion
that's wrong too.
calls for an exercise of volition.
Yes.
So they cannot really be denying volition.
Well, that's right. That's true. Of course, the people that deny volition have to use it in order to deny it. It's axiomatic. But they don't realize that. They don't understand that. So they're just going merrily along. But you do make a good point. Let me push it a little further. I wasn't going to bring it up at this point, but I'll just throw this out. I think if you understand the power of human volition, you will realize that there is no need to suppress any conscious experiences. You don't have to suppress thoughts. You don't have to suppress emotions, and you should not do so, because the reason is, just because you have a thought doesn't mean you have to believe it. And just because you have some emotion doesn't mean you have to act on it. You can use your free will to evaluate whether or not your thoughts are right and whether or not your emotions are motivating you towards something that you should actually do. And so you shouldn't be, people that are afraid and that believe in suppression or repression, like the Freudians, for example, believe such because they don't grasp the power of volition.
Yes, but I need to add a caveat,
Oh,
which
boy.
is that we humans have a limited number of attention pointers in the operation of our consciousness. And there are times when one needs to actively stop paying attention to things that would occupy attention pointers that we need for the current cognitive task.
Yeah, I think that's true. Although I would say, we probably should look at examples here, but without doing that for the moment, my immediate reaction to that is, sure, but the way I do that is by choosing to think about some particular the thing that's important to think about. That's how I do it. I choose to think about that thing rather than this thing that's unimportant. And that's what free will is, the power to hold on to an idea, to sustain a thought process on a particular idea. That's what free will basically boils down to, as I see it. And so we have the power to do that.
Yes, but if one is shooting a dangerous person with a pistol, one needs to devote all of one's attentional pointers to correctly handling the pistol. And even though the important thing is the target, you should, in order to shoot well, you should put the target out of your attention pointers and concentrate on handling the pistol correctly.
Yeah, well, that's skill. That's right, but that's a skill. That's front sight focus, right?
Yes, but there's a caveat there, which is that allocating attention pointers should not be done on the basis of importance, but on the basis of what is needed in the existential situation.
Yeah, well, that comes down to a definition of importance. I would have said what's needed in the situation is what's important. That's how I would have thought of that. So I think we're okay in agreement basically on this point. You need to attend to what you attend to. Now I would add to this that there are circumstances where acting on emotion, purely acting on emotion, I think is correct. It's been noted since David Hume, at least, that strong emotions interfere with thinking. And you might wonder, why the hell is that? I mean, how did that get past the evolutionary filter? Isn't that a bad thing? Well, there are circumstances. If you're out there on the African savannah and a lion's running after you, you do not want to turn around and start thinking about various things about the lion. You just have to, your hope there is to enact the automatic running or whatever your automatic response is. You don't have time to be thinking because he'll be on you. So there is those kinds of emergency situations, I think there is a certain value to the fact that emotion automatically suppresses thought. It stops it in an automatic sense. But outside of emergencies, I don't think you should suppress anything.
No, not exactly, because in the savannah, one is not running on a paved road. One is running on an obstacle course, and one must think about how to position one's body so that one will run as efficiently as possible on this obstacle course.
Well, we're talking about
That is a
details here.
cognitive activity.
There's a problem. The problem is that if you thinking, here's the basic problem here. Thinking takes time. You don't have time. So if you don't have the automatized skill to deal with an uneven surface, I think you're going to get eaten. I think that's what the ultimate result. Sorry, you're going to get eaten. But if you do have the automatized skill, you don't think then. What the emotion does is, I think, two things. It suppresses anything other than an automatic response, which needs to be skillful enough to get away. And furthermore, later on, when you get back to the fire, when you've survived, and you get back that evening to sit around with the fire with your fellow Savannans, you're sitting there. The emotion will motivate you to think further about how to do it. What to do in the next time to avoid that situation. So it inhibits immediate thought and it motivates later thought. That's what I think. And you have to.
However, automatic actions requires the use of attention pointers. And the more complex the terrain, the more attention pointers your automated skills will require.
I guess by attention pointers, you mean the resources of consciousness.
Yes.
Your conscious attention. And although this is all true, the better automatized something is, the more well automatized it is, the less of the conscious resources you need to deploy to exercise that skill. And so if you're really good, if you're really good at running through the savannah, you won't have to use a lot of, of conscious resources. You won't have to use nearly, if you're not skilled. It's just the well-known, everybody knows about this example, like in driving, where the beginner driver has to pay a lot of attention to all the details, and the skilled driver really just has to have a very general intention and doesn't have to pay attention, and can therefore attend to other things, including conversations with Adam. He can do that because that's what automatization does.
There's a problem with that, which is even highly automated skills require attention pointers. And the greater the skill, the more attention pointers they require. And there is a limit to how many attention pointers you can do without, so that the most skillful person, the greatest music virtuoso, for example, or the computer typing champion, especially a computer typing champion in Chinese, for example, has to, in order to be at the top of the game and do this as well as it can possibly be done, has to use all of their attention pointers for the automated task.
Okay, I'm glad you said that last part, that in order to do it at the top. And now, by qualifying it that way, I think I'm okay with that. But the guy escaping in the savannah, it's not a matter of doing the absolute best dance that he could do. It's doing a good enough dance to get away and survive, and get away. That's what he has to do. It's a satisficing situation, to use a Herb Simon idea.
Well, you can't really do
the absolute top there. You're not going to be able to do it.
It's a life and death situation, but it's the guy who survives the greatest number of life and death situations in his life who gets to reproduce the most.
That's true.
Because he lives the longest.
That's true.
And that's how we humans evolved, having consciousness with the greatest number of attention pointers available to any primate that we know of.
All right, I think that's fine. Let's go. Okay, shall we go on to more specifically to emotion? And just say for here, my summary for me is imagination is not necessarily arbitrary. It depends on how you do it. And there's a skill of deploying it properly and thinking about it properly. Galileo did it brilliantly. Einstein did thought experiments too, but we really can't. I don't think we can even start to go into those. But a lot of philosophers do bad thought experiments, and the zombie one is a good example. I mean, there's some good philosopher experiments. I think myself, the one that's called Mary. Mary, the neuroscientist, is a little weird, but it's pretty good. The idea of somebody who's brought up who in a black and white, has never seen color, but she knows everything about the science of color and the science of everything that's known in neurophysiology. She's basically has infinite knowledge or unlimited knowledge. And one day she comes out and sees a red apple. And the point is, she's learned something. She's learned something new that she didn't know before by seeing the red apple, even though she had some knowledge about red in terms of its neurophysiology. So the whole point of this is to point out that there's more, with something that Adam said earlier, by the way, that there's more to the experience of red than just the firings of the neurons in the brain. It's an anti-materialist argument. And it's a little bit weird, but I think it's actually got some merit, that argument. And there are some others. John Searle's Chinese Room is also excessively weird, but it's a pretty good argument. I won't go into it now.
Well, I think it's the opposite. If you want to make optimal use of your imagination and your emotions, your imagination and your emotions need to be grounded in reality. And the instrument for grounding them in reality is the exercise of reason.
I don't understand why that's the opposite. I think that's what I said.
It's the opposite of the conventional view that reason and emotion are mutually exclusive.
Okay,
it's so the opposite. It's the exact we're opposite.
You and I are agreeing, though. Okay, all right.
Yes.
I don't care about the rest of the world. To hell with them. We're right. All right, let's go on. Unless Bob wants to jump. Bob looks like he's at least amused here. You want to jump in here, Bob?
Well, I just want to tie it to a general thing. The issue of two definitions. It is so often the case that you come up with a question and the answer is yes and no. And the yes side is one definition and the no side is the other definition.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And usually the thing that makes it a fact that both definitions are true is that one definition is doing the thing the right way, and the other definition is just doing that thing.
Uh-huh. Okay. And how exactly, I get the outlines of that, but how exactly would you apply that in this circumstance?
Well, here, imagination, is it necessary? Yeah. Is it always good? No. So should I use my imagination to do planning? No, not if you're going to not base it on reality. Yes, if you are going to base it on reality.
Okay. All right. Well, I think
I should also say that this gets into semantics as a branch of linguistics, because there are languages in which if you have a more specific definition and a less specific definition, you have a rule in the grammar of word production to produce different words for the two definitions.
Okay, I'm going to go.
Now,
go ahead. Sorry. Yeah, Steve.
Can I add, because I noticed that adult imagination, epistemic utility is argued, there's an exploratory role of imagination, and there's one that's more concerned with justification. And we might say the two definition that Bob is referring to, one of them is justification, one of them is exploratory, because I don't, I see they're both appropriate
Okay.
in context.
That sounds right. I think in addition, there could be some imagination that is neither one of those things, that is just imaginary gibberish. I think that's possible too. So there's a third category. But I think there's something right to what you said about justifying and exploring, that those are different. I think that's right. I'll have to think about that some more, though. I have to think about that. Now, what about emotion? We're running late. We haven't got much time here for emotions. Sorry. But Ayn Rand says, and for the new intellectual, emotions are not tools of cognition. Now, what does she mean? I think what's meant there is, and Bob wants to say, okay.
No, I just say yes and no.
Yes and no. They're not there. I think what she has in mind, I don't know, because I'm not her, but I think what she has in mind is they're not evidence. They're no substitute for evidence. The point that we started with. But I think that emotions, in particular, the kinds that I've called inklings, that I introduced to an objectivist audience in the late 1980s at Staten Island. Inklings, feelings about thoughts, that's the word I use for feelings about thoughts, are indispensable signals. That's a bad word, but I'll use it. Signals about the progress of thinking. And one of my most basic pieces of advice, and that practically is the essence of how you should control free will, in my opinion, is to pay attention to and follow up on inklings. Inklings are feelings that go from uh-oh to aha. Well, once in 1,000 years, there's a eureka, but basically they're from uh-oh to aha. And they're feelings that they're like, they're hard to describe, because feelings are hard, emotional states and processes are hard to describe. But it's sort of like at least the negative inklings, which I sometimes call stinklings. The negative inklings are like, it feels like a rock in your shoe. You got something that kind of is there and it kind of annoys you. There's something wrong here, and you don't know what it is. And then you try to figure out what it is. Well, that's a signal from your subconscious telling you, please refocus. Please do something more. Please direct free will to somewhere. Direct it somewhere that it isn't at this moment, because you need to make some progress in your thinking. It's a signal that's telling you that the subconscious can't do that itself, because it doesn't have free will, but it can give you these little signals. So, my favorite one, which I'll mention just very briefly, that I've used 1,000 times, is, should a man be allowed to marry his widow's sister? And, the first thing that pops into many people's head, including my own, was, why not? And, but when it happened, I read it, which was in a research study from 1908 of Insight, a psychological research study. I read it and I said, why not? But fortunately, that lasted very briefly. I had an inkling, a feeling that something's wrong here. Something doesn't quite integrate, doesn't quite hang together. And it's just rocking the shoe. And I know that feeling, and I know that you need to go and get specific. And in this case, if you get specific on the meaning of widow, Adam's got the right idea here. You get specific on the meaning of widow and realize that a widow is a woman whose husband is deceased. And you really focus on that fact, which doesn't necessarily come to mind automatically. When you focus on that, you realize that should a man be allowed to marry his widow's sister? Well, it depends on your views on dead people's rights. Should they be allowed to be married? Because the guy's dead. So, you can take that. So I think those feelings are crucially important. They motivate thinking. They motivate the directing of free will to a new thought subject often. Usually it's to some, what I call a key concept, a concept that matters a lot in your thinking, that you need more knowledge from, but that slipped by too quickly. It allows you to it guides you to directing your attention toward it. And you do that in advance of any evidence about it. That is, I'm perfectly willing to direct my thinking somewhere without specific evidence that I'm doing the right thing, or that what I'm thinking about should be thought about. And I bring this up because in our last couple of minutes, I'll try to do this quickly so that you guys can comment. I bring this up because there is some out there, here and there are statements to the effect of you need evidence to even think about something, even I think the usual word is consider something. And I don't think that's right. You need evidence to arrive at a conclusion. You need evidence to arrive at possibility, but I don't use evidence all the time to arrive at what I'm going to think about next. And if that's whim worshiping, then hang me, because that's what I do. If I have an inkling, I follow up on my inklings, because I know sometimes this is the factual basis. I do know that frequently when I do that, it works. Not all the time. Inklings are not infallible. They're feelings, they're emotions. They're not infallible, but they often work, particularly if I happen to be have some significant knowledge in the field, whatever it is, in the area of study. My inklings are more likely. But anyway, I have the view that it's essential, because you can't always decide to think by evidence, because how do you get the evidence except by thinking? Evidence is not like a box of Cocoa Puffs that somebody throws at you at a rock concert. It doesn't rain down on you. Okay.
Hold on,
Adam.
because there are many varieties of evidence, and sometimes we're in a situation where we know that evidence of something exists, and we need to use reason to narrow it down to something very specific. For example,
but that's not exactly right, because I don't know that there's evidence. I have a feeling that there is. I don't know that there is.
Well, hold on. The feeling that the evidence is there is itself a fact of reality, because your consciousness is real.
Yeah.
So this constitutes evidence that your consciousness has found something that you have not cognitively identified as yet with sufficient precision, but your state of consciousness itself is evidence of something. If Michelangelo gets a block of marble and he has a feeling that in this block of marble there is a sculpture for him to get out by chiseling at it, even if he doesn't know all the details of the sculpture he's going to get from this marble, he knows for a fact that his consciousness has some evidence that there is something in that block of marble from which he can chisel a sculpture.
Well, if
consciousness is real, and evidence about
Yeah.
consciousness is real. And evidence about one's own consciousness, including those inklings that you were talking about, is real, and real artists use it to do good art.
Yeah, I agree with that. Except I'm not sure whether evidence should be, the term evidence should cover that. Normally, I mean, it's okay with me, I guess. And then, of course, that's one way of solving the problem. That basically turns almost anything into evidence. Any feeling that you have, any whim that you have, anything. Oh, I think, I feel like this. I feel like that becomes evidence. Now that seems to me to be.
But it's not evidence of existential things. It's evidence
of your
consciousness, which is awareness.
Consciousness is existential. Consciousness has a specific identity, and it exists, and states of consciousness are existential facts.
Yeah, but
it's a different kind Now, there are facts that are external to consciousness, and there are facts that are internal to consciousness.
Yes.
But this does not mean that facts of things that are external to consciousness
All right.
are
Well,
a
Bob-
lesser kind of evidence.
I think Bob was just trying to distinguish the phenomena of consciousness from the phenomena that are separate from independent of consciousness. And that distinction is a valid distinction.
It's
Even though they
valid
all exist, a consciousness exists. I don't think Bob is going to deny consciousness. Last I checked, he wasn't a behaviorist. That's right, right?
Well,
Yes.
But
exactly.
it's not a problem.
But
Yeah.
in order for a psychologist to think scientifically about consciousness, he must take the evidence of states of consciousness as evidence of facts that he studies.
Well, there's a little bit of equivocation there. I don't know how far I can just do. I'm going to try to do this quickly because I want to what I want to do is summarize what we agree on in a moment. But I'll just want to say that, of course, you recognize the existence of these feelings, and you don't deny the existence of the feelings. I think you can't do that. But what they actually signify as evidence, that is another question. That's a separate question. But let me just see if I can summarize something that maybe a position here that we can all maybe we can agree on. Maybe let me try. I asserted that that there's no reason to say that we should suppress any thoughts or any feelings except in emergency situations. And the reason for that is that we can always evaluate those things by volitionally. So you don't have to believe something pops into your mind. You don't have to believe it. And if a feeling pops into your mind, you don't have to act on it. If you feel so, I personally have all kinds of, and this applies to imagination. I have all kinds of states of imagination that I do not care to describe on this sedate forum. But it doesn't bother me that I have all this weird stuff because I don't have to believe it. It's just, it's entirely separate from what I've proven to be true or know that I should be acting on. So that's one thing. And then the idea that however you want to describe the evidential status of inklings, that it is not only okay, but essential to act, to pay attention to and follow up on inklings if you want to think well. However you want to describe that in terms of the evidence, I think that's an important fact. And it could be missed by people who think that any emotions are to be avoided in cognition. So do we agree on those things? Maybe there's something else.
Yes, I think we agree on those things. I would add that inklings in the mind of a rational person almost always have some kind of rational source, even if one has not yet identified what that source is.
Yeah, that sounds right. I mean, it's not always appropriate.
Consider Michelangelo and a block of marble. Okay. There is, in his experience with getting sculptures out of blocks of marble, a source for an inkling that there is something interesting here for him to work with.
Okay. Anything else, Bob or Steve?
No.
Well, maybe this would be a good point because we're just a little bit over here. It might be a good point for us to pass over. It's not Passover. To pass on to go to Clubhouse, the Wild West discussion.
We got some super chats.
Oh, some super chats. Let's do that. Let's do that for sure.
No comment, but one by Walter Vizchek, and I think that's a Germanic name, if I'm not butchering it. Thank you for the super chat. And then Apollo Zeus has a question. Are dreams a form of imagination? And let me finish the last, it's a comment.
Yeah.
Oh, this is Adam Reed. Yeah, he's talking. Okay, he's
Adam
on the
Reed
channel.
Boy,
Yeah.
that's the first time we've had that happen. That shows what a
Yeah.
convoluted mind Adam has. Yeah, go ahead. What does he, did he post a
He-
question?
Yeah, he says Michelangelo used a lot of
Oh,
reason to
Michelangelo.
express emotions in sculpture. That's
Okay, all right.
and a contemporary master of
Let's
his
go back
skill.
to that question, which is a good question. I think I had an inkling that's a good question. Our dreams, what are dreams? What was the question about dreams? Our dreams, imagination. Was that the
A
question?
form of.
Okay, now I think it depends on definition and context. Bob says no, but I would say, first of all, I posed imagination as being volitional, and one of the things I notice in my dreams, and your dreams may vary, you know, most of the time I have extremely reduced volition. I can't do the stuff that I can do in real life. I can't solve problems. I can't read text. Sometimes I can't even walk. You know, I'm inhibited in dreams a lot of the time. So in that sense, it's not under my control usually, except when I have lucid dreams, and then I can sometimes, in the middle of a lucid dream is when you're dreaming and you know you're dreaming. And I have those on occasion, not all the time, but sometimes. And in some of those cases, I am able to do things like I can construct a person that I want to construct. I mean, the image, a person, I can place a person in the dream. I've done that before, not commonly, but I can. So there are some cases where there's maybe some overlap. But if you're asking in essence, I would say no, dreams are not imagination. Bob wants to say no too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Adam wants to say,
I have nothing to add to that.
okay.
Now, I do have a lot to say about sleep and dreams, because I personally happen to have a sleep disorder, and anything that concerns me, I tend to study in depth, but I don't think we have time for that.
Well, we do on Clubhouse. So Steve, you have any other thing on this, on that, or any other
Nope,
topic?
that's it.
Well,
No,
yeah, I
that's it.
should.
That's a good question. Let's go over to Clubhouse.
Hold on, Lee.
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
In my previous attempts to use Clubhouse, I could not be heard. I think this was due to a piece of security software that I have now removed. So chances are I may be heard, but if I'm silent on Clubhouse, that means that the bug is still there.
Okay, and you can always try the standard Clubhouse fix, which is to go out of the room and come back in, which may or may not work. Well, you can always try that.
Yes, I've done that.
Yeah,
I've done that many times, and it never
doesn't
worked
work. Okay.
yet.
All right. Well, I hope it works.
Maybe this time with Kaspersky removed, it's going to work.
Very good. Let's find out.
Okay, so everybody else, if any key issues or key concepts came up, bring those over and we will try to refocus on those ideas in Clubhouse. And thanks for coming, and we'll see everybody next time.
Very good. Thanks.